In this video, I will show you guys how I used ancient wisdom to win over 150k, winning at 9BB 100 while battling some of the best in the game. Let's go. In the 5th century BC, Sun Tzu, a Chinese military strategist slash philosopher, wrote the book The Art of War. In his book, Sun Tzu reviews strategic principles and tactics needed in order to win wars, and is up until today considered to be one of the most influential works on strategy and warfare. When I was on my pursuit trying to become the best, I've applied his tactics and they have helped me battle my way through the ranks all the way up to 5100. In this video, I've separated the 3 principles that have had the biggest impact on this success. Principle number 1. Know yourself and know your enemy. Or to quote Sun Tzu, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Now this quote essentially emphasizes on the importance of self-awareness and knowing how your opponents play. Know both and you will win. Know only yourself and you will sometimes take a loss. Know neither and you have no chance of winning. What I took as actionable advice from this quote was the following. Prepare like a boss and know your competition, which was my background throughout this journey. Just like you and every other poker player, I have leaks in my game and inconsistencies in the way I perform. In order for me to evaluate if I'm winning in a 3 to 4 handed battle, I need to objectively look at my game and see how my weaknesses and strengths line up to those of my opponents. Does Villain's strategy naturally play into my flaws? Are my biggest exploits neutralized by the way he approaches the game? Next to the opponents you have across from you at the tables, there's one more opponent which might be the toughest one to beat of all, which is yourself. Sun Tzu says, he will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. Am I in the right condition to execute the strategy needed in order to win in this lineup? Not only right now at the beginning, but also re-evaluating 1 hour in. Are we still profitable? Are we still in our A game? Or are we showing signs that we've slipped in our C game in the way we play, think, behave or feel, and maybe it's just time to take a break? Many players lose win rate because they don't show up in the right state of mind, are playing in lineups that they're simply not beating, or are unable to recognize that their opponents are getting the better of them, or that they're playing very badly and it's time to take a break. Sun Tzu also emphasizes on the importance of laying plans. Sun Tzu says, the general who wins the battle makes many calculations in his temple before the battle is fought. Or more simply said, every battle is won before it's fought. In many battles that I've played, the battle was already won before the first card was even dealt. As next to having put myself in the right state of mind, I would go over a document that I made for any regular that was at least occasionally battling, in which I outlined the 5 strategical adjustments I was going to be making against this player that would give me a significant edge, would have the money flow to me, and basically guarantee that I would be victorious in this battle. This is probably one of the most important things if you want to become successful in battles, which is to direct every battle towards your game plan instead of reacting to whatever your opponent throws at you on the fly. Never can you be caught by surprise of something that your opponent does. Every trick that he has in his arsenal should have been anticipated, analyzed and countered beforehand. For the last step to victory, I would visualize the battle. I would see myself successfully implement my strategy, feeling calm, confident and having everything under control. You can download the primer that I made using the link in the description down below, in which you will visualize executing your game plan towards victory. Principle number 2. Avoid what is strong and strike at what is weak. Military tactics are akin to water. For water in its natural course runs away from high places and hastens downwards. So in war the way is to avoid what is strong and to strike at what is weak. Much like water taking the line of least resistance. The way I came up with these 5 strategical adjustments versus all my opponents was by analyzing their strengths and weaknesses. Exploiting someone's weaknesses from a technical perspective is a topic commonly talked about nowadays. You compare someone's stats to that of GTO, and The further he deviates, the bigger the leak and the higher possibility for a plus if he exploit. Something that's especially important when analyzing your opponents is to figure out how they are constructing their ranges. Since they are human, it's impossible for them to construct their ranges equal to GTO, meaning that they will either be too weak or too strong in certain lines. And to apply this principle on the tables, we will avoid the stronger range constructions and we will strike at the weaker range constructions. However, there are more weaknesses to exploit. I remember taking advantages of some guys who were willing to start battles despite the fact that they were already playing a lot of tables simply because they did not want to give up the lobbies. Or players still willing to take on battles despite them already being 6 hours into their session and probably very tired, or even better, stuck and tilted. Avoiding someone's strengths completely sometimes can be done, but can be minimized. Sun Tzu says, "The clever combatant imposes his will on the enemy, but does not allow the enemy will to be imposed on him." This quote emphasizes on the importance of maintaining control over the course of a match. Let's say you play versus an opponent who plays perfectly facing a 1/3 c-bet big blind versus button. You are the button in this hand and your strategy is to often range c-bet for a 1/3 sizing. Your strategy plays into the strengths of your opponent's strategy and puts him in his comfort zone. Instead, what I would do in these scenarios is try to eliminate 1/3 c-betting and mainly play big bet check. This way, avoid putting him in his strength and taking him out of his comfort zone. This same philosophy can be applied to pre-flop. Let's say you play small blind unopened and your opponent plays perfectly big blind versus a small blind raise. However, when we start limping, we see that he makes various mistakes. We can now neutralize his strength by never raising and only limping. The same can be said for the raise sizing that you decide to use. Let's say you normally open for a 2.5x on the button, but you see that your opponent plays very poorly versus a min raise or poorly post flop in general and you want to play a lot of pots with him, you might start raising more and for a smaller sizing. The same can be said the other way around. Let's say your opponent is very tough or he might overdefend versus the 3x, you might open less and for a bigger sizing. Simply said, what you're trying to do with your strategy here is to have nodes in which your opponent is weak occur more frequently to nodes in which your opponent is strong. But what if your opponent has no weaknesses? Well, he might actually have weaknesses, however, you're not skilled enough yet to spot or exploit them, which brings me to another example of this principle. Just because in order to be the best you have to beat the best, does not mean you have to play against Linus and Stefan at 40k and L straight away. When I moved up to 510 and started to focus more on battles, I would analyze all players that were willing to battle and started ranking them best to worst. Then what I would do is I would start battling the guys who I identified were weaker and avoid the guys who were clearly the bigger winners in these games. If I was playing a 3-handed game and one of the better regulars would join the game 4-handed, I would always sit out, take a step back and reevaluate how this game will now play. Versus who am I now playing in the most common scenarios and am I still playing within the weaknesses of my opponent? If I would think the flow of my EV was so significantly disrupted, maybe because I'm now playing the most common scenarios versus the stronger regular instead of versus the weaker regular, I would put my ego on the side and simply leave the game and come back tomorrow at a later time. By battling day in and day out, I started to become better at spotting and exploiting my opponent's weaknesses. I was getting more confident in my game and at some point there was no one at that current stake that I wasn't willing to battle, which meant that it was time to move up and repeat the process. You do this until you reach guys like Linus, to which you apply the principle again. Avoid what is strong. I remember at the top point of my battle career, I played against most opponents. Linus, OTB, big blind bets I soon concluded were simply out of my league and would thus avoid. But occasionally there were some players following different guidelines, ignoring most principles I've outlined in this video, and it usually did not end up well for them, only contributing to the ever-growing graph these guys had, especially 3 and 4-handed. Principle number 3. Flexibility and adaptability. In 6max games and especially tighter range formations like EP, MP, it's much easier to hide your flaws as you don't play versus the same opponent as often, and in tight formations strategies are usually less mixed due to one clearly having a range advantage. The way you make money in 6max, especially in bigger pools, is by you executing a solid strategy. This strategy is built on GTO principles and deviations based on population tendencies, and have your opponent hand you EV simply because they're playing a weaker overall strategy than you. In 3-4-handed battles though, there's more more room for exploitation, as when ranges get wider, people's natural tendencies get enhanced as they are no longer protected by significant equity advantages. Battles, unlike 6-max, is not just about showing up and playing your strategy. It's about adapting versus the players you're battling, being elastic with your ranges, and flexible in the strategies you decide to deploy. Thinking ahead of counter strategies your opponent can implement, what the signs are that they're countering your strategy, and what the counter to their counter would be. Sun Tzu says, "Flexibility enables commanders to conceal their true intentions, mislead the opponent, and launch unexpected attacks. By adapting their approach and keeping the enemy guessing, they increase their chances of achieving victory." You want to try and throw people off their game by doing things that they did not expect of you. I remember using unconventional raise and 3-bet sizing to create an element of doubt in my opponent's head, as he's not really sure what the ranges look like. Next day I might create confusion by completely altering my strategy, never c-betting and only using overbets for example, or completely switching to a range c-bet strategy. These are all elements of mental warfare as well. Sun Tzu says, "In the midst of chaos, there's also opportunity."
But how do we do in battles?
Bots fall short in their ability to maximize versus human opponents, as their strategy is not specifically designed to maximize their win rate versus their opponent's tendencies. There was a discussion a while back between Saulo Costa and George aka UMAP Bro about how hard a 500 NL player from Saulo's stable would get destroyed in a high stakes battle. Saulo made the argument that it could never be much, since he has put his students to war against the bots and they were only losing at -2 BB 100. Bots, unlike Stefan and Linus, don't apply Sun Tzu approved strategies of warfare. Your weaknesses won't be pounded on. Your strengths will not be disarmed. Next to that, there's various psychological aspects of the game that are not being taken in consideration. How close to his technical ability is this 500 NL player able to execute when he's up against very established pros playing at the highest stakes? There is a difference between a bot hero calling you and a Linus hero calling you. When the bot hero calls you, you know it's just part of an equilibrium strategy and he's gonna call that hand some of the time. With Linus though, we don't know if he's exploiting you, because maybe unconsciously in your strategy you're over bluffing and Linus is onto you. The same is true in a spot where you decide to hero call and Linus shows up with a very thin value bet. He might be onto you, and these kind of things can start fucking with your mind in the real world. Doubt can start to creep in, because what were you doing here in the first place? It's 40k NL against Stefan and Linus while you're only a 500 NL regular. Next to that, when playing against a bot you always know what to expect. You can just look at his game and this is the game that you're going to face. However, you might look at the stats and analyze the games of Stefan and Linus, thinking that you now know what to expect, only to find out that they decided to implement a different strategy versus you than what their overall stats in their game plan suggested. Or even better, they might use the fact that you know their tendencies against you by doing completely the opposite. That, my friends, is the art of war. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you like this video, I'm pretty sure you will like this video here as well, so go check that out.